In the deepest depths of Stirling University lies a man who ponders important questions. Not questions like, what's the meaning of life, or why are we here? But questions that center over one concept. How do I scare my audience? Tonight, he will answer that question, reading tales that are so utterly horrifying they may leave you weak at the knees. Welcome to the Spook Zone.
Ladies, gentlemen, oh my... There is... Okay, before we begin, there is a weird static that is odd. Odd. Let me see if I should use the other microphone, maybe. Is this better? Yes, it is. Seems if I turn up the static on... If I turn up the microphone volume for the first microphone, it just kind of doesn't work. Grim. Anyway, ladies, gentlemen, welcome to the Spooks. Eldritch Abominations also. Oh my god, this is a great way to start the day. Yes, welcome to St. Paddy's Day. I promise I've not been drinking yet. The reason I am being such a poor show so far is just because I am very not good at things generally. In any case, we are going to be having a great time tonight. We're going to be reading some spooky stories, a couple of Celtic-inspired ones, some spooky creations and ideas from the north and from of course the west in Ireland, because of course it's St. Paddy's Day. So I might as well do a little bit of a Celtic-themed episode today, a Celtic catastrophe, if you will. Yes. We are going to begin this show with a story about a banshee. That's what well, or at least it should be about a banshee. It's called The Banshee. It's not got an author or anything like that. So we shall have to figure out what it really has in it, whether or not there actually is a banshee inside, as we read. I'm excited. I hope you guys are excited. I'm very down to clown. Don't know why I just made a humongous pause there. I think it was because I was burping and making sure I didn't get caught on camera. Camera? Recording. Whatever. This next story is The Banshee. I have no idea what to expect. I've gone through the internet to find some Celtic inspired stories, and this is what I found. We shall see if it is a waking nightmare or if it's really good. We shall find out in any case as we read. This is The Banshee, and it's anonymously authored, so there you go. This is not a fictional story. This is an account of what happened to me when I was young. It was a normal day in County Kerry in Ireland. Well, what the rest of you would consider to be normal. The likes of you reading this will probably have a job of some vague description or be in some form of education. Not me. I'm a free spirit. I do not, or did not when it happened, attend school. I left early because school just wasn't for me. Let's leave it at that. I was more of a hands-on kind of person. I'm not saying I'm stupid, because I'm not. It's just I had a different sort of intelligence that was demanded by the education system. Myself, descending from an agricultural background, and I'll tell you this, strange things happen out in the country. Strange, eerie things. Growing up in Ireland, I of course heard my fair share of folk tales told to me by my dearest mother, God rest her soul. Tales warning me to not disobey my parents or else the tall man will get me. But this is not what this is about. I grew up listening intently to these folk stories because that's what they were to me back then. Tales, fables, just stories. I'm not sure if you readers are aware of one of Ireland's most famous folk tales, forgive me if I'm wrong. A creature known only as the Banshee. I'm 17 now, but when it happened, I was around the age of 12. It was a normal day for me and my little sister, who shall remain nameless out of respect. We were playing out in the field one late afternoon. The winds of Ireland swept across the barley-created waves. across the land which rippled in various shades of gold and yellow. The sun was starting to retreat back into the horizon, illuminating the world in such rich shades of purple and orange. As usual, me and my sister were playing hide-and-seek in the fields. And me, being the older brother, I tended to opt for the seeker, just so I could see her smile when she laughed as I found her. On the verge of the field were the woods. Even when the sun cast celestial vibrancy upon the woods, it still remained dark and foreboding. Anyway, we were playing hide-and-seek when I noticed something just on the rise of the field before it dipped down again. It was like this black bag. That's the only way I can describe it. Just kind of floating there at the bulge. I dismissed it, assuming it was just farming waste and like something had fallen off a tractor. As I continued searching for my little sister, she was an excellent hider, and sometimes I wouldn't even find her at all, causing my mother to panic rather frequently. Through the barley, this black bag thing managed to keep itself fixed in my peripheral vision. Again, I dismissed this, thinking it was the cause of the wind fluttering the bag around. I noticed some movement in the barley about 20 meters from me, so I crouched down and silently waded through, hoping to find my sister and hoping that the sound of the wind would mask me. As I hoped for the sound of wind, I heard something quite different. A sort of wailing, a very faint and distant wailing far in the distance. I stopped and listened intently and made a cup over my ears. The sound of the wailing merged with the whistling of the wind coming through the woods, almost like the sound of a kettle boiling. I crouched there, listening for an amount of time, like 30, maybe 40 seconds. My sister jumped up from the hiding and ran to a different location, which made me jump out of my skin. That bag blew nearer to me and was now in my sight, directly, just floating there. I began to be creeped out. Seemed like it was following me. I shouted to my sister that the game was over and that we were heading back inside. And my gaze was fixed upon this black bag, which seemed so ominous. My sister appeared at my side. She looked up at me, and I down to her. She knew that look. I was being very serious. I told her to go back inside the house, which was just over the wall and 100 yards down the road. She obeyed, as she knew the tone I gave her. I made sure she got over the wall safely, and then I turned to where the bag was, or at least where it used to be. It seemed to move across the field in a zigzag pattern towards me. I froze with shock. I didn't know what to do. All I could do was just watch this bag come closer and closer, the wailing becoming louder and louder, like the sound of shell shock. After what seemed like an eternity, the bag was in range of being able to be distinguished for what it was. It wasn't a bag. It was a sort of black robe, tattered and torn, the bottom stained. I stood there, mouth open in terror. I watched this thing come towards me, this bundle of rags float across the field. The wailing became louder, and my heart began to pound, trying to escape my chest. Sweat flooded off me. All I could do was watch this thing come closer and closer. The bundle of rags stopped several meters in front of me, and the wailing stopped. All I could hear now was my heartbeat in my ears, like some ancient primal drum of war thumping away. The bundle of rags rose from the ground and emitted a blood-curdling shriek, a piercing scream which deafened me briefly. I held my ears and felt blood trickle out of them. A hooded entity filled those robes. It stood tall and thin, long white hair flowing out of the hood. It then turned to me and looked right into my soul. I felt a sharp pain in my chest. I clutched it agonized and writhed on the ground. It let out the same deafening scream, and I noticed, through fighting back tears, that it was a woman. Pale and hollow she looked. It pointed at me with their long skeletal fingers, and then pointed in the direction of my house. It then looked directly back into my eyes. And as quickly as it attacked me, it disappeared into a bundle of rags on the ground. I lay there in the earth, panting, sweating, and looking at the bloodstains on my hands. I lay there in pain and fear. It was then I realized what I had just seen, the omen of bad news and death, the banshee. It wasn't coming for me. It came as a warning. I had to go back to the house. I stumbled up from the earth and eventually ended up inside, and I found my sister standing in the kitchen, silent, in shock. She didn't hear me crash through the door. I startled her when I touched her on the shoulder. She looked at me in horror, tears streaking her face. Speechless, she looked at me and then looked to the floor, where my mother lay, dead. Authorities report she died of a heart attack. But I know what really happened. Oh, that was a neat little short story. A few grammatical things that were a little bit annoying, but apart from that, quite well written, tensely built up, all of that jazz. I liked it quite a bit. Yeah, fun to read. I'm gonna quickly double check and see if this microphone is still buzzing. Sort of is. Like, it's odd. It's almost like making a sort of, I wonder what's happened to it. It's very strange. Maybe there's a ghost inside. Whoa. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to switch headphones and see if it's just a problem with my the headphones and not the microphone. 1 second. Nope. Definitely not just a problem with the headphones. Yeah, that microphone. This microphone is being a problem. Well, that's unfortunate. I'll have to tell the folks on the chat when I can. In any case, let us move on to another story, another spooky, frightening tale of Celtic inspiration, and this one is a little bit less Irish and a little bit more Scottish. To my recollection, to my knowledge, this is a story about kelpies. Now, kelpies, if you are unaware, are basically the equivalent of water spirits. They're like horses that live in lochs and that. They are. There's a little bit of whether or not they are super bad or super good. But they are well known for their whimsical and magical nature and stories. If you've ever been to the Kelpies in Falkirk, you'll basically have an idea what they're supposed to be. They're like big water demons. It's pretty spooky. It's not something I've ever really read about in terms of people actually writing stories about it. I've never ever seen anybody do it, and this has intrigued me. And as such, I am keen to see what this person, I shall read you their name, for there is an actual author to this story this time, Michael Page, has written. And I'm keen to see what's going to be about. Yeah, I'm excited for a fun time. I hope you are too. This story is called The Mollendinar. There we go. The Mollendinar Burn, and it shall be quite a tale, I am sure. Here we go. Jack McKay huddled in the cold midnight street, with a pale green sleeping bag encasing his lower half. Spindled trails of light reflected off the gleaming roads from the damp lampposts. But the cold gave Jack his nightly jitters, not by a long shot. The small flame betwixt his green eyes just below the bent spoon, full of rose-grey powder. This last week of panhandling had been kind to him, It was likely shit quality, riddled with impurities, but that was irrelevant. He had an itch. So why waste what the good Lord delivered? It might leave a wee aftertaste in your gob, but enjoy the night, trust me. The dealer had assured him. As much as his dealer would. A little further down the pavement was another homeless man, draped in a tan blanket. He was sitting upright, with his face buried between his knees. Jack knew him as Graham Wilson, a neurotic character. He had met in a queue for the shelter off Crimea Street before they had reached capacity and shooed everyone else away. A man was approaching, dressed in some thick and woven coat and Rupert Bear trousers. His footsteps sounded strange against the asphalt, a sort of clop, 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 as if he were wearing a pair of tap shoes. A large black tweed hat covered his face. He bent down to Graham and mumbled incoherently to him. The two exchanged mumbles for a brief minute or so, before Wilson nodded. In the corner of his eye, Jack watched the two disappear into an alleyway. Probably going to suck him off at alcohol pounds, Jack thought to himself. Once the powder became a gluey, black puddle, Jack dipped the needle tip and drew up the ethereal fluid full of the angels. His arm was permeated with collapsed blood vessels, too narrow and bruised for use, but he still had a good few ports left. He spied a surviving vein among the scarred landscape and slid the needle in slowly. One pull of the plunger to check for blood, and then a slow push forward till the black substance disappeared. First his arm tingled as though someone lit a fuse in his venous expressway, then all at once an extracellular stimulant erupted into a euphoric surge. Pure, illusory pleasure coated his brain like thick wax. The jitters stopped. Glasgow, with its year-round Atlantic gales, with its Victorian tenements and modern skyscrapers, no longer existed. And for a moment his thoughts reached a peak of the vast universe. Then the shrieking started. It was a horrible shrill of terror. It came from around the corner and sounded like it was pouring straight out of Graham's throat. Through his veil of dazed elation, Jack couldn't drown it out. Someone needed help. His help. He lumbered over the walkway and round to the corner before his drug-weighted thoughts could catch up. As he reached the narrow gap between the two tenements, the ulating stopped. Double yellow lines ran across the side street's edge, with a few bin wagons under the orange glow of the street ramp. There was no trace of the two men between the chipped brickwork. The pathway was a dead end of dilapidated windows. Only one way in or out, where Jack stood. Still not entirely at his wits, he stepped inside, where Graham and his screams dissipated. An odor of wet trash and rusted iron perforated the air. A drain cover was lying next to a void in the asphalt. Jack peered down the exposed pipe. Assisted by the orange light, he could make out something lying at the bottom of the chute. A mangled human hand. 2 fingers are missing. The palm was for the most part peeled away from the exposed tendons in a ghastly fold. Jack stumbled backwards from the sight and nearly vomited the universe from his body. Without another thought, he barreled out of the area as fast as his legs allowed. To say the vile image of that disfigured hand smothered Jack's thoughts was an understatement. Every night after that incident, he tried fruitlessly to expel the repeating scenarios of Graham Wilson, sitting on the same street corner, like him, followed by the clop, 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 then the screaming. Why those sounds? Why wear those shoes? Maybe the dealer had stuck some hallucinogenic kick in his merchandise. It's difficult to trust your eyes with a mind as high as a kite. During Hurricane Ballbag, as it was affectionately known at the time. Jack was too afraid to tell the authorities, let alone to check that dreadful place again. Russell Gresham, one of the few souls left in his social circle who wasn't a peddler, was the only one who could tell. He had several years over Jack, and had been sleeping rough in Glasgow far longer. His face was a contoured map of wrinkles with a scruffy walrus moustache beneath a jutting nose. In his early years, he had been a gamekeeper for deer before the Parkinson's worsened, and one bill after another went unpaid due to the alcoholism. The two squatters often slept and conversed in the rickety upper level of a condemned corner row of house off Greendyke Street. Any passerby would notice the mounds of accumulated garbage, and the front door covered in violation notices. The corridors were dark and unheated, and uncovered bulbs protruded from the ceiling fixtures over a bare wooden floor and uncurtained windows. "I'm going to tell you something about Glasgow," Russell told Jack. Only it came out more like Glasgow. What you sure was a shame. A heavy shame. But when you've known these streets as long as I have, the dear green city starts to look a lot of a hell of a less green. Every town has their dark corners, but the devil be damned if we didn't have some wicked ones. Jack's spine was firmly against the wallpaper that peeled off like dead skin. Russell and his ramblings could no longer reach him. There were nothing but white noise and incoherent whispers in the faraway glades of his thoughts. But these glades were not green. They were as dark as the cavernous depths that always waited for him. Newton's old dictum, what comes up must come down. Could he pull himself out this time around? Not without a hollow metal fix. He needed it now more than ever before. His veins were hungry. The guilty pleasures were like an insufferable ring in his ears, enough to drive anyone dog-mad, mad enough to tear out your eardrums, just for the silence to return and the cravings to cease. His sanity was screaming, just like Graham Wilson's mutilated hand. They found a liver bobbing around in Hogganfield Loch. Could have belonged to that fella you heard, Russell muttered, scooping a spoonful of cold vegetables and losing the majority from hand tremors. Didn't take livers for floaters. I guess you learn something new every day. Jack's fleeting attention made him crack a contemptuous smile as he clutched one of the empty aluminium cans. The can fell by Jack's head, snapping him out of his pitch-black trance. "Dinna beat yourself up, laddie." Russell laughed through stained, grinning teeth. "Even if you went to the police, they'd have taken one good look at you and told you to scramble. Nobody believes rush sleepers, let alone the junky ones. Come quickly, Sony Bean is painting the streets red. I'm sure that'll digest well." But Jack would not find his solace for another 4 nights, until his next fixed behind the deserted goodyards of the Great Eastern Hotel. The large piece of property that loomed over Duke Street had long fallen to ruin. A rough sleeper from 1900 times would have been able to call this place shelter before storms and tenacious winds withered its structural integrity. Portions of the roof had collapsed, and its halls were vacant and uninhabitable. What remained of the hotel was a structure stripped down to its innermost shell, more to preserve its character than anything else. This dose couldn't hold a candle to the last batch. No thanks to that fangled tooth dealer. So far diluted and inadequate that all he got was a mild spark of pleasure for about roughly 5 seconds or so. What a fucking joke, Jack seethed. But at the very least, it was enough to grant him some sleep for the night. The ringing momentarily fell still and was replaced by the sound of running water. It was coming from the Molendinar burn that emptied into a lower culvert in between two perpendicular walls. The burn's flow surfaced briefly for a few yards beneath Duke Street, and then disappeared yet again into the underground channels of green Glasgow's veins, or it would eventually reach the Clyde. Across the gap, on the west side, was the car park of a business centre, surrounded by an 8-foot metal barrier. "Sammy!" The shout woke Jack. A woman with black coat and faded teal trousers was scouring the goods yard. She looked to be in her late 20s, with short, ruffled auburn hair. Judging by the high-pitched whistles and the "Here, boy!" she was either looking for a dog or someone off her head. Come to think of it, maybe he'd seen a dog sniffing around the area before he shot up. A bark resonated from the burn. The woman scuttled towards the ledge and slapped both hands over her kneecaps. "How did you get down there?" she sighed. An excited bark was all the response. Jack watched her approach the cage ladder to the right, that was attached to a rendered cement wall and topped with a safety railing. She carefully descended the steel rungs until she fell out of sight. After the quiet splash of her shoes, Jack crept forward and peered over the ridge. The Auburn girl was tailing a soaked Labrador that splashed around in her happy trots. What was once bright yellow fur was now sopping and clotted with mud. No dog could look more content. "What has gotten into you?" she shouted with a partial laugh and a hiss of annoyance, while the cold water rolled over her heels. "Need a hand, lass?" Jack called down to her. "We're fine. On your way, please," she said with a denoted sliver of passive aggression, not so much batting an eye at him. Just as her fingers were about to hook the lab's green collar, it veered away and galloped downstream, straight into the culvert. "Sammy, no, no!" she screamed, making chase and stopping at the foot of the tunnel, where her voice echoed back to her. She paced the air passage back and forth like a wooden duck in a shooting range. Another bark reverberated off the brick-lined walls. Finally, after several attempts to coax the dog out, she sloshed away inside. "Little fucker," she jeered. Jack shuffled down the closest bank and cautiously dropped into the canal. Fresh cold water straight from the northeast seeped into his shoes. He stood beneath a stone arch at the mouth of the passage where the girl entered. It almost looked like a bullet shot right through Duke Street's crotch. "You find them?" he called into the black corridor. Traces of a voice bounced back to him, still calling for Sammy. Once he stepped inside, it was almost as though a trip plate of events triggered all at once. An abrupt sequence that would leave Jack McKay walking in the middle of the night, glazed with sweat and holding in the screams for the rest of his life. The calls for Sammy stopped and erupted into a blood-curdling shriek. The girl's silhouette failed out of the darkness towards him, followed by a clop, clop, clop. A shadow reached out and collapsed on top of her. Something was there, a large, hunching, amorphous shape. Waves of acrid, bacterial odors flooded Jack's senses. Without thinking, he pulled the lighter from his pocket and flicked the small flame to life. Through the dim light, he could see a bloated mass of wrinkled skin. Several limbs, with hooves twisted entirely backward, held up the bulk of its barrel-shaped body. Dripping hair that resembled pondweed stems encompassed its muscular neck with yellow patches of fur. Deep, heavy breaths wafted out of its elongated muzzle, anchored deeply into the girl's shoulder. Something snapped from its brawny neck. A green nylon collar. Jack then realized the overall size of the thing was growing, and the yellow blotches of fur were dissolving into its black mane. Why? A rickety voice squeaked out of her grey, spectral face. Her words creaked out with a weight of sanity about to be pulled to pieces. Why aren't you helping me? The corner of her mouth perked up in a caricature of pure madness. The hooves began to scrape against the rutted floor, following downstream. She was being dragged away into the perceptible bowels of the underworld. For a moment the paralysis left him as he dived forward and gripped the woman's hand. The lighter plopped into the water and bathed them both in blackness. He pulled with whatever strength his welted arms could collect, but the black skin, whatever it was, stuck to her like viscid black hair. The sharp incisors in her shoulder clenched even tighter until a blood vessel popped. Blood peppered Jack's face and made him gasp and lose grip. He fell backward into the burn as it seeped into his lower regions. That was when he locked glances with the human-like irises, two slits of golden embers that held a cold light beneath them. Sort of way a god would look at a fly, unmoved or concerned. Go ahead. Watch to your heart's content, my friend. Who will believe you anyway? Pierce emptied from his bladder. In one fearful, convoluted swoop, Jack turned tail and fled out of the culvert's throat, deafening out as much as the woman's screams as he could. He ended up in a vacant lavatory of a nearby park. Footsteps of mud and dirt residue smudged the monolithic flooring. The petrified face of sagging skin and dark, telltale eyes stared back at him. His skin had long since lost its radiance, and after tonight it would never return. Red pox streaked across his face, still wet and smeared. He cupped his trembling hands with water and sloshed his face. Blood wreathed down the cracked porcelain sink and threaded down the drain. Did you see it? Yes, you did. Are you sure? Damn fucking sure. Twice now the screaming had come. Twice now people had disappeared. Those horrible eyes bored into his skull and left repeating thoughts of how gold could look so cruel. He could tell the authorities, but what would they do? They couldn't deny someone's disappearance, but as for its cause, he may as well show up stark naked to the station and give the chief a big slobbery kiss. This must be what being waist-deep in shite feels like, he thought. Russell was right, and for the time being he was the only one Jack could trust. He sneaked into the foreclosed corner house through a gaping window on the upper floor. Russell was nestled over a stained mattress and lightly humming in his sleep. Jack shook him awake. "What the fuck?" He bellowed and swiped dazedly in the air. "Russell!" Jack's skinny outline spoke to him. Sawney beans painting the town red. "You hooked up on the needle bolt, you ballbag!" Russell snorted and began to turn over. That was until he smelled the blood. "Christ, what did you do?" "It isn't mine." Jack exhaled through the gasp between his pale fingers. "Someone else's. The woman that took away." Russell's protruding nose wrinkled. "What do you mean, it? What are you on about now?" Something was inside Mullen and Ardburn. That was as far as his tongue's deadlock could allow. Somewhere in the membrane of his thoughts was an aimless speck of wounded clarity. Never speak it, never seen it, right? He wished it were right. Then he could run away from these things that would surely drive him insane. But no. It was too late for the gift of ignorance. I think it was a kelpie. The words floated out of him. One eyebrow rose and crinkled Russell's forehead from his congested expression. Water horses aren't they real? They're tails for birds. I know what I saw, Jack exclaimed, with the density of a stone pillar, and this kelpie was not looking to offer children rides to their watery doom. It can change its shape. That's how it lured the young lassie. That's how it lured Graham Wilson. It's real, Russell. And it feeds just like you and me. Your arse is out the window. How would all the Glasgow know not be on its haunches if an actual kelpie were swiping people from the street? This burn, Jack explained hastily. It's been moving beneath the city, all the nooks, all the crannies that run straight through Hogganfield Loch into the city. It finds someone alone and then takes them away. You said it yourself. This town has dark corners. Russell grunted begrudgingly. See, you were right, he derisively grumbled. And something was hiding in the pipes. What can a junkie like you do? Images of the woman's petrified face was acutely showed in Jack's mind. Alongside the butchered hand, alongside the sardonic embers. Kill it, he breathed. I have to kill it before it happens again. Russell kneaded the bags beneath his eyes and drawled out a weighty groan. A portion of his sleep-deprived brain wanted to slap every piece of nonsensical gibberish out of this dafty fool. The rest could not deny the blood, as much as he wanted to. Jack Mackay was a forlorn and hopeless heroin head, but he was no murderer. The look in his dread-stricken face reanimated a distant memory for Russell, back into the trip of depravity known as Belgrove Hotel. About 3 years ago, I fell on desperate times and took to the Belgrove Hotel. Never seen squalor like that hole. Rats infested the courtyard, and our 5 by 10 foot rooms with barred windows. The stairs and the mouldy corridors reeked of urine and vomit, and emptied cider and vodka bottles were left in the corners. Residents would smoke joints and drink themselves unconscious, while the staff left them unattended in pools of their filth. The owners were banking around $1 million or so a year in housing benefits. One night, a wee old lady burst through the door, looking white as a tail of a ptarmigan. She was crying for help, saying something pulled her daughter into the sewer drain. One of the staff, some African man, threw her out onto the street. We barely had any room for ourselves. To this day, I wish I'd helped her, but my spirits were too hobbled. A few days after that, a small pair of lungs turned up in Hogganfield Loch. Russell stood up from the bed and crunched it into his neck to the side. They could both hear distant thunder outside. He walked over to the pile of bags with a graceless gait. I thought she was off her head. Frankly, I still think you are. Jack watched him fumble through one of the swollen black bags until he pulled out a small box. He returned to the bed and rested the black box over his lap. But devil be damned if they fish your parts out of that lock. He unclipped the metal holders of the box and opened its contents to Jack. The sheiks have got my hands. Pooch nowadays, so they didn't have much use for it. A Glock pistol lay there in its container, with a box of Winchester silver tips subbed next to the grip and trigger. But if you're talking out your fanny flaps and stick up a bank, then forget my name, eh? A biting gale rolled over the large kettle pond of Hogganfield Loch. It was one of the 4 large bodies of water in Glasgow Park, left behind by Ice Age giants. This was the paramount source of the Mullindair burn that bled into the city. Thunder mumbled lowly from the overcast clouds hidden behind the night sky. Jack walked along the tarmac path that encircled the loch's outer edge, the pistol loaded and securely in his pocket. Doubt, consisting of where to look or what to expect, harassed the loony bravado he called confidence. It felt like finding a needle in a haystack full of ravenous snakes, a needle he wanted in the worst way possible about now. For all he knew, the Kelpie was lying merrily in the middle of this damned lake, enjoying the fruits of its labor. He glanced over the shallow stretch of water and met a small wooden isle situated in its center. The isolated piece of land acted as a sanctuary that any buzzard or windfowl could nest in. He followed the trail to the southern corner of the loch, closest to the wooden island's sandy beach. Unfortunately, the only way to reach it was to trek through the watery gap between the shores. He stared at the water's glittering ripples from the wind, hypnotized by its alluring steams. Perhaps if he swam like a madman, it would be over in a minute or so. But even 60 seconds could separate the dead from the living. He'd be nothing less than an oblivious swan, waiting to be pulled under, ripe for the picking. But if his theory was right, and he had every reason to doubt himself, the Kelpie came here to finish feeding. Frankly, he wasn't even sure if it needed to eat for necessity. Those tapered gold eyes weren't hungry, they were egoistic. After all, gods only eat and drink for pleasure purposes. Finally, the madman made up his mind, and traversed into the cold with the pistol held over his head. It was just shallow enough for his feet to slop through the clumps of sand and submerged both shoulders. A sudden shock rippled through him as a long, slender reed ran up his pant leg and filled him with frightful visions of a glistening black mane. He propelled himself against the Langmuir currents, expecting at any moment for a set of powerful jaws to rend the flesh from his ankle and drag him into the black, bubbly abyss. The sand slanted upwards as he reached the wooded island and pulled himself ashore. Fingertips smothered in soft, sticky earth never felt greater. A streak of lightning flared across the sky and released a thunderous crack that would have given Tyrannus and his six-spoked wheels a run for their money. Jack retreated into the dense layers of shrubs and thick undergrowth. Mature oak trees loomed overhead, housing many nests. Other than the birds, plants were the dominant species here. He had someone hoped, anyway. The farther he travelled through the foliage, the lack of human disturbance became evident. There was no chiseled path, nor signs to follow. If any soul went missing here, they'd disappear into the soil forever. He scrapped that thought for now. The greenery soon opened into a clearing, probably somewhere in the island's centre. Thunder rumbled, a low-pitched growl above him. But there was a different sound behind it, the sound of sobbing. Someone was close. Ugly roots of fear and relief of another human presence branched throughout his system. He could not allow himself to stop now, not after everything he'd witnessed. Even if he denied tonight, the uncertainty would inevitably kill him. The wails led him to a sloped woman, curled up, vulnerable against one of the lofty oaks. She whimpered as her auburn-coloured head hung between her knees. "Miss," Jack spoke softly in between her convulsive gasps. The pasty, sickly-looking girl floundered against the bark. "No, please!" she shrieked with anguished blue eyes. Patina of cuts and bruises covered her body. Most notably, the torn fabric over her left shoulder revealed grooves of missing flesh. It was the Auburn girl. Jack couldn't believe she'd survived. "It's okay," he said, slowly drew closer to her. "I'm here to save you, lass." You're the one who left me there to die," she screamed hoarsely. "You're right, but here I am." He traced the forested area with a cursory glance. "Where's it gone?" he inquired, She shook her head and started to bellow. I don't know. Everything was dark and wet. Something wouldn't let go of me. It dragged me deeper and deeper. Where's my dog? Where's Sammy? I can't see. But right now, you need a hospital. The Auburn girl pointlessly attempted to appraise herself with the trembling noodle legs. I can't. It hurts too much. My ankle feels twisted. She whined pitifully. It couldn't be helped. Jack knelt beside the girl and hoisted her arm over his shoulder. Her petite body leaned into his. In this position, he felt as vulnerable as she was. Did it already know he was here? Was it baiting him for a 2-on-1 deal? Despite the possibilities this woman's needed medical attention, he'd have to take that wager. They traversed through the hedges towards the border where Jack came in. The thought of crossing that water now felt like suicide, but what choice did they have? None, the quiet voice of reason whispered. What's your name? He asked through the wet strands of short hair atop of head. Talking would help. She didn't answer. Quite a nice heap of shite we've ended up in, eh? Jack said, with a makeshift chuckle, holding whatever sanity existed in an upside-down world. She still didn't answer. Despite his constructed machismo, woven from self-assurance and resolve, something wasn't right. The woman had a dainty, lightweight look to her, but she felt heavy, almost like a gravitational pull, only affecting one of them. The weight of her steps thumped to the ground. Her arm resting on his shoulder seized around his neck. A scar of lightning fire ripped through the sky and illuminated the entire loch for an instant. He looked at her, and she looked right back. Blue eyes no longer greeted him. Only golden embers. Something wet and clammy clanged to Jack's arm. Her pastel skin took on a runny, gelatinous texture like a doll in a microwave. It climbed over his shirt and suctioned into him. The fabric of her clothes lost their texture and now resembled vaguely coloured gelatin. The vicious goo-like secretion that once made up her body crawled over his arms, his torso, and started up the neck. Her eyes were infatuated with him and harboured an almost coy agitation. I win, they said. Two booming flashes illuminated them, one from the storm, the other from the pistol, stowed away in Jack's pocket. The fly-trap substance released him, while the silhouetted shape of the girl collapsed to its knees. The rough outline of a dissolving figure was sputtering heavily from the new opened hole, where her throat and silver bullet were acquainted. Her colour blackened to a pitch residue. The pungent fungal smell was back and stronger than ever. Muscles in its back contracted and bulked together like an interweaving tumour. But Jack wasn't done yet. 2 more shots opened the creature's expanding back. It gurgled out a droning moan. Spouts of white, which reminded him of star jelly, jetted out of its wounds. An eerie satisfaction suffused through him. So gods bleed, do they? How does it feel? He yelled through fixed, rictus grin. By now its mouth and nostrils had elongated to a flat muzzle with projecting razor-edged canines. Beneath her was the muffled pop of several ribs being pulled out of place and curving outward. She was getting larger, more cylindrical. The bones in her arms and legs were forcibly extending. Her toes and fingers shriveled away into slant cone-shaped stubs. Another round tore right through its fleshy jowl, and then 2 more in its hind leg joints. The creature squealed piercingly like a banshee. It reared its triangular head backward where Jack caught sight of its eyes. Filled with crystallized fear, the universe coursed through his veins once again and transcended his mind into an unsurpassable threshold. He had met the enemy, and by the saints this day was his. "Send me another!" he screamed to the tempest sky. "Send me another ignorant god to put down." The large, chthonic horse raised itself upward, still bleeding the star jelly profusely. Its powerfully built muscles leaped into a foul 4-beat gait. Clumps of earth, kicked up in Jack's face from its twisted hooves. He gave chase to the monstrosity with his pistol deadlocked on this fleeting figure. "Where are you off to? I thought you enjoyed the hunt." Jack cackled as he madly fired off more shrapnel in its direction. The beast ripped through the thicket and leaped into the loch with an explosive splash. Jack skittled to a halt just an inch from the edge and bombarded the disturbed water until the click, click, click of an empty magazine. "Come back any time, you big Jesse. Be waiting right here, you fucker," he screamed, unhinged and hysterical. He sloped backward and fell flat on his back. A sensation of unfettered joy bathed his frantic bliss, and for the first time in a very long time his jitters ceased. Russell Gresham was lying between a doorway with a sheet of cardboard pinned behind his spine and another tucked beneath his sleeping bag. It was a humid sundown, with a few light rain outbreaks that left the pavement cold and wet. His panhandling cup grossed £4. Big tippers today. The deplorable, foreclosed house he had temporarily called his own was remarkably put back on auction and sold. But rough sleeping was nothing to a soul like his. Slow-paced footsteps approached. Russell didn't look at them, as it may put off potential alms. "Come on, let's hear that charity," his inner voice implored the stranger, anticipating the lovely chink. "By hell, I've lost it, haven't I?" The stranger abruptly spoke. Russell lifted his eyes to the astonished face of Jack McKay, or someone that resembled him anyway. But that unchastened face couldn't belong to the Jack that he knew. It was too bright, too much life in the cheeks. Clothes were also too clean. He was sporting a grey fleece jacket, dark green trousers, and unblemished sketches. "Well, isn't my favourite ne'er-do-well?" Russell chuckled, glancing at him up and down. "Got all the muck and junk out of your system." His animated cheeks creased to a broad smile. Most of it. He laughed and bent towards Russell. "A few still linger here and there, but I've reduced it." "How'd you do that?" "Drug crisis put me on. They got me on the methadone, stopped the cravings. It was hell's bells, worst nights of my life. But eventually the urgence lessened, and I was able to quit the needle. Next thing you know, I find a warehouse job." "So that's what ate you up," Russell said. "I thought for sure it was an imaginary kelpie. Has it bitten your arse yet?" Jack's tongue lapped around his lips. An empty, searching expression impeded his glowing smile and 1,000-yard stare. "Not since then," he muttered. Russell still remembered that night 6 months ago. When Jack returned, swamp-drenched to high hell, and a white-plastered face like a nun who's kissed St. Andrew himself. The deep-seated look wasn't crazy, more so enthralled. "I got rid of it," he muttered from the floor, with the empty pistol lying over his knees. "Sent the bastard back to the water hell it crawled out of." That was the last Russell saw of him. He figured that maybe Jack's monster had caught up with him, but there was one other thing. No further organs were found drifting in Hoggenfield Loch since then. "It wasn't imaginary," he added during Russell's recollection. "Perhaps I am crazy, but let's say I was to believe what I saw. It's whether I do or don't, that won't change the fact that 2 people died, kicking and screaming in the dark by something that was and still might be lurking in that loch." Russell shrugged passively and shot an incredulous look. "Goes to show, tighten the hinges and there'll still be a few screws loose. Speaking of which, you still owe me through those 3 silvers you wasted." "I owe you a lot, Russell, more than you may tolerate," Jack said as he rose to his feet and extended his hand to him. "Come with me." That solid stone tone was back. Russell blinked. "What are you on about now?" "Get off the streets! Come with me!" Russell blinked again. and this time shook his head. "No thanks, lad. I've seen all there is to shelters. I can't say I meant... Times are different," Jack interrupted, his outstretched hands not wavering. "Things aren't perfect, but they certainly aren't the same." Russell stared at him, at first flabbergasted and then something else. To this day, he wasn't sure what prompted him to take Jack's hand, but if he were to wager a guess, it would probably be the look in his eyes. They were the kind of eyes that cherished their freedom. The sort of eyes that were able to defeat their monsters. "Well, that wasn't that bad. I thought that was quite good. I didn't think that was bad at all." I will admit, at some point, like, God, I both like and hate like reading in accents. It's just oh dear, oh me, oh my. It's like sometimes I'm pretty good at accents. Sometimes I'm really not, and I'm pretty sure this is one of those times that wasn't. Yeah, I think honestly, like, In any case, I don't know how much experience this guy has, with actual Scotland and Glasgow, but hey ho. Yeah. Actually, there's a pretty good comment here actually under the story. "The constant underlining of 'this is Scotland' didn't really need to happen so often, and some of the Scottish dialect came over a bit Dick Van Dyke, but otherwise pretty good. Attention to detail and grammar needed in places, though." Yeah, it's pretty much exactly what I'd say. As much as what, Scotland, great place, do like it. It kind of felt like someone not from Scotland writing about Scotland, and it's just like, boy. I think I still like that. I think it was a bit coincidental. I think it was a bit convenient that after murdering a horrifying beast of nature, the main character got off drugs. But you know what? Hey, if murdering terrifying, horrifying animals will get you off the needle, then do that. Just murder a horrible water demon. Why not? What's the worst that could happen? You'll be fine. Oh, jeez. Anyway, that was the Spook Zone. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening in. I hope you had an enjoyable time. I certainly did. These Celtic-inspired stories were great fun to write, and great fun to read, I should say. I fully hope that that next week I'm able to read some more stuff, because I understand I've not been on as much as I should be. I missed a couple of weeks. Yes, last 2 weeks of this show. So as soon as possible. Just nearly burped again. Great. Okay. Thank you all for watching, everybody. Again, it's been a really good time. I hope you have a really good St. Paddy's Day. I hope you don't all get too destroyed. I hope you all are having a fantastic evening. But above all, stay spooked. Oh, it's a ghost. Oh, my God.